Yes, we are ready.
Okay, Chair, is the presentation visible to all members?
Yeah, yes, I can read the presentation. So if I can, all members can.
Okay. Okay, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, I would hasten to move to this, but just to indicate that the fourth quarter was the last quarter of the year, as it is known, and we had been wrapping up, and hence the DM's opening remarks are both reflective of the fourth quarter and the year under review, but they are also forward-looking in terms of the issues that have subsequently occurred post the closure of the financial year on the 31st of March 2020. And we will then cover the expenditure report as per the outline there, Chair. We will look certainly at the expenditure per program, and then we will look at the expenditure per economic classification, and then move on to transfers and subsidies, focusing on some of the major grants, as this is the area where the bulk of the money the department has in a budget is spent on. And then we'll also look a bit forward post the financial year end and closure of books at the rollover applications we have made in respect of some of the savings and under expenditure items we have experienced during the financial year. Chair, if I move on to the expenditure per program, the department still has 7 programs listed as such there: administration, ITP, rail, road, civil aviation, maritime, as well as public transport branches. And those 7 programs have been allocated resources. As you see, the total allocation of the budget was 64 billion. And if you look at it in as far as the program expenditure patterns, in 2 of the programs we have spent 100% of that budget, and in 3 of the programs we have spent 98%, and in 190, and in the other 80%. Now we have a direct charge on the International Oil Pollution Compensation Fund, and this charge we sometimes a little over, sometimes under, and this time around we are way below. We do budget for it adequately. We are charged directly, but we are also charged in as far as the spillages that happen in our waters, and where we send a team out for mop up and cleaning up the oil spillages. So depending on how many in a year, we use an impressed system to budget for it, because we never know what we're gonna sit with. Now that we have spent just 25%, as you would see in the current budget, we then only top up the 25% that we have spent on, and it varies every year depending on what has happened in the year under review. So it's not an exact science, and you also don't want to under budget, so that should there be more spillages, you are able to deal with them and you do not have capacity. And if I move to the other areas, I will come to the reasons why. In some areas, the expenditure, like in civil aviation, was this low at 80%. I will then give reasons and detailed reasons as to how we arrived at that. But the total expenditure for the department under the year in review was 99%, all in all. Chair, here are some of the reasons for over and underspending. In administration, vacancies, some of them have remained open, and we had been pushing to reduce the vacancy rate. It has been sitting at about 10%. We have this far reduced it to 8%, and we are continuing to reduce it to well below the normative 5% allowed by DPSA. And to this extent, we have been communicating with the Treasury. They have agreed that they would retain the funding for those positions for us to continue with the work. We were disrupted in filling all the top management vacancies due to COVID. Shortlisting was already done, and some interviews were already set, and we had to postpone and cancel them with the lockdown coming through. On integrated transport planning, the underspend was on the regional corridor strategy, as well as on the national transport planning data bank projects. They had commenced, but had to be stopped due to the lockdown, and we couldn't finish the processes on time. So certainly beyond stage 2, when we arrive at level 1 of lockdown, we will resume with the programs and to bring them to finality. On rail transport, the underspend has been on some few vacancies in that area, and on road transport, the underspending was on the Sahamba Sonke program, with all the challenges we have seen with capacity of the provinces, and we have had this challenge on the expenditure there. On civil aviation, the underspend was on the watch keeping services due to the reduced contract amount. This chair relates to the monopoly of Telkom in the provision of the services that we hire, and the data as well as the radar services that we get to keep watch of all the ships in the ocean and to look at where they are and what is happening, and to also be able to be responsive to seafarers who are in distress. And in that, we are required by our membership of the IMO to keep a 24-hour watch and to maintain it as such. Previously, Telkom had demanded expenditure in this regard of about 120 million. We felt it was just too exorbitant, and we compared with other IMO countries, and we looked at the purchasing power parity of our country and how far we can do a comparative study, and we came to the conclusion that it was too exorbitant and too much. Negotiations underwent, and as they were happening with Telkom, you would recall that in the last financial year, a portion of the payment of the watchkeeping services was declared irregular expenditure by the AG because we continued to pay for the service although the contract was not concluded. But we had no way of not continuing with paying for that, primarily because if we stopped paying, then Telkom would terminate the service, and there will be no way for us to look at the ships at sea. And we continued with negotiations parallel, and when we did our comparative analysis and put it on the table, it was only then that Telkom relented and accepted that their costs were way too far. By that time, we had, for the financial year under review, budgeted about 100 million towards this, seeing what their quotations and invoices were ranging in. But we were able to show that we actually should be paying about 50% or half of that. They finally agreed to a contract in the region of 50 million rands, and which then meant that the rest of the amount we had budgeted for in there was now excess. So in many ways here, we were victims of our own success in successfully negotiating a fair price, and therefore we found ourselves with excess budget there. And the money was already ring-fenced and identified for watchkeeping. It was difficult to redirect it to do any other thing. In maritime transport, the underspend was on the merchant shipping bill as well as the feasibility study of the tugboats. And the merchant shipping bill, Chair, there was a delay with the cabinet process. You would recall that it came in and it went out, and then it was then removed from the roll of the bills we needed to deal with and on the leader of government business submission to Parliament, and thereafter we did a motivation, and then they finally accepted that it should get back on, and that caused a huge delay for us to undertake the review, and not knowing whether the bill will ultimately get onto the roll or not. But by the time it went back on the roll, Chair would recall that just before lockdown, Cabinet had just approved the bill for it to be tabled in Parliament, and the review process will then commence with that once it's referred for comments. In as far as the public transport area is concerned, the major under expenditure there is on two key issues. First, tax recapitalization, which